Wake up tomorrow and your job is gone. Not fired, gone. The concept doesn't exist. The alarm doesn't go off because there's no alarm, no clock, no Monday. You open your eyes when your body decides you're done sleeping, which turns out to be around sunrise, and then you just stand there in the light with the whole day in front of you and absolutely no architecture for it. Here's the thing. Your first instinct is probably that this sounds like a crisis. No structure, no income, no purpose handed to you by an employer. The story we tell ourselves about prehistoric life runs something like brutal, short, terrifying, every waking hour spent in desperate pursuit of not dying. Hobbes gave us solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, and that framing has been rattling around in Western thought for about 350 years. It feels true. It sounds reasonable. It is almost exactly wrong. In 1972, an anthropologist named Marshall Salins published a collection of essays that quietly detonated a bomb under that assumption. He called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. Not affluent in the sense of accumulation, they owned almost nothing, but affluent in the sense that their needs were genuinely, structurally met. Studies of the Kung San of the Kalahari and the Hadza of Tanzania, two of the most closely observed forager groups on the planet, found that adults spent somewhere between 3 and 5 hours a day on actual subsistence activity. Hunting, gathering, preparing food. That's it. The rest of the time was legitimately, structurally free. Not free in the way your Sunday afternoon is free, with the low hum of unread emails underneath it. Actually free. Anthropologists watching these groups in the field kept noting the same thing. People sat around. They talked. They napped in the afternoon heat. They played with children. They did, by modern productivity standards, essentially nothing, and they were not miserable about it, which, honestly, is a little embarrassing for us. We are working longer hours with more chronic stress and less genuine rest than people who were hunting animals with sharpened sticks. That is not a metaphor. That is the finding. So what did 3 to 5 hours of work actually look like? Not like you're picturing. The survival horror version, gaunt figures sprinting across the savannah, perpetually one bad hunt away from starvation, is a story we invented mostly to make ourselves feel better about spreadsheets. The actual evidence, from both the archaeological record and from observational studies of contemporary forager groups, looks considerably more relaxed than that. Take the Hadza of northern Tanzania. Researchers who spent extended time with them in the field noted that a successful morning of foraging, tubers, berries, the occasional small game, was often wrapped up before the midday heat hit. Then people came back to camp. They sat. They ate. Someone told a story. The afternoon had a quality that modern life has essentially engineered out of existence. It was genuinely unscheduled. And the foraging itself wasn't desperate. It was skilled. Hadza women can identify dozens of edible plant species by leaf shape alone, know which tubers are worth the digging effort at which time of year, and carry that knowledge the way you carry your phone, constantly, effortlessly, without thinking of it as expertise. The work was cognitively rich and physically grounded, and then it was over. Done by noon. The afternoon belonged to whoever you were when you weren't trying to survive. Here's the part that complicates the picture further. Food sharing wasn't charity, it was politics. Among virtually every forager group studied, the person who brings home meat doesn't keep it. They distribute it, strategically, deliberately. And who you give to, and how much you give, defines your social position more precisely than any title or salary. The hunter who hoards is not respected. The hunter who shares widely is. Which means even the act of providing food was fundamentally a social performance, woven through with alliance building and obligation, and the very particular human pleasure of being seen as generous. You weren't just feeding people. You were making arguments about who you were. The calories were almost secondary. Most of those unscheduled afternoon hours were spent talking, not planning, not problem solving in any formal sense, just talking about other people mostly. Who did what? Who said what to whom? Who is reliable and who absolutely is not? What we would now call gossip delivered with the same slightly lowered voice and the same sideways glance that you'd recognize instantly from any office kitchen in the world. Robin Dunbar, an evolutionary anthropologist at Oxford, spent years arguing that this was not a character flaw in ancient humans, it was the technology. His social brain hypothesis proposes that the human neocortex expanded to its current size not to do mathematics or build cathedrals, but to track the extraordinary complexity of living inside a large social group. and the number he kept arriving at was 150, the approximate ceiling of stable, meaningful relationships a human brain can actively manage at once. 150 people whose names you know, whose histories you carry, whose trustworthiness you're constantly, unconsciously updating. Maintaining that network required constant input. You had to know things. Here is where it gets genuinely strange. Dunbar's further argument, the one that raised eyebrows, was that language itself may have evolved primarily as a form of social grooming. Other primates groom each other physically, picking through fur, removing parasites, spending hours in direct physical contact to reinforce bonds. It works, but it doesn't scale. You can only groom one individual at a time. Language lets you groom 20 people simultaneously, sitting around a fire, updating everyone's social map at once. Gossip in this framework is not small. It is the original social technology, the foundational software of human community. They gossiped, they told jokes, they argued about who had behaved badly and what should be done about it. They flirted, complained, negotiated, performed. And all of it was doing something, building the invisible architecture of trust and obligation that held the group together better than any rule or law. If this is the kind of thing that gets you, drop a like, leave a comment. It genuinely helps. Anyway, the campfire, in other words, was not where people rested from social life. It was where social life happened. There is a skeleton in Iraqi Kurdistan that changes the shape of this whole conversation. It was found in Shanidar Cave in the 1950s by archaeologist Ralph Selecki, buried approximately 50,000 years ago. The individual was Neanderthal, not even our species technically, though close enough that the distinction starts to feel uncomfortable the longer you sit with it. And the bones tell a story that takes a moment to fully land. This person, researchers call him Shanidar 1, was born with a withered right arm that had been amputated below the elbow, probably in childhood. His left leg was badly damaged. He had significant spinal degeneration, likely causing chronic pain. He was, by any reasonable estimate, largely unable to contribute to the group's subsistence activities. He couldn't hunt. He probably couldn't forage effectively. He was, in the brutal arithmetic of survival of the fittest storytelling, a net cost. He lived to be between 40 and 50 years old. In a world without agriculture, without stored surplus, without hospitals or safety nets of any institutional kind, someone kept this man alive for decades. Someone chewed his food when his teeth wore down. Someone helped him move. The group absorbed the cost of his presence not because he was useful in any narrow economic sense, but because he was theirs. Selecki also found dense clusters of pollen around several of the Shanidar burials, flower pollen, from plants that bloom in spring. The interpretation is contested. Some researchers argue it may have arrived via burrowing rodents rather than human hands. The honest answer is, we can't be certain. But the skeletal evidence for Shanidar 1 requires no interpretation. The care was real. It lasted years. It was chosen. There's no evolutionary pressure that demands you keep a one-armed, limping, pain-racked individual fed and sheltered for 4 decades. No gene compels it. No logic requires it. Someone just loved him. And they did it without a word we'd recognize, without a philosophy of care, without any framework except the specific, irreducible weight of knowing this particular person and deciding that mattered. That's approximately 50,000 years old. The feeling is not. Now here's something that genuinely freaks people out when they first hear it. You probably weren't designed to sleep the way you sleep. The assumption, 8 solid hours, lights out, straight through to morning, turns out to be a surprisingly recent invention. Historian A. Roger Ekirch spent 16 years combing through pre-industrial diaries, court records, medical texts, and literature, and what he found, published in 2001, was a pattern so consistent it's hard to dismiss. For most of human history, people slept in 2 distinct phases. A first sleep, lasting roughly 3 to 4 hours, then a waking period of an hour or so, then a second sleep until dawn. The wakeful hour in between wasn't insomnia. It was its own thing entirely. People used it. They prayed, lying still in the dark. They had sex. Medieval medical texts actually recommended this window specifically, on the theory that both partners were more relaxed and conception was therefore more likely. They visited neighbors. They lay quietly and thought, in a way that the relentless compression of modern schedules has essentially abolished. Ekirch found references to this first sleep and second sleep pattern in sources ranging from Homer to 16th century French physicians to court depositions in colonial America. It wasn't a curiosity. It was just how nights worked. Then artificial lighting arrived and the night compressed, and the two-part pattern collapsed into one, and a remarkable number of people began complaining of a strange new condition, waking in the middle of the night and being unable to get back to sleep. The honest answer about why consolidated sleep became the norm is that it was never really chosen. It was imposed, first by candlelight pushing bedtimes later, then by gas lamps, then by electricity, until the window between first and second sleep simply closed. Your body may still be looking for it. That low-grade alertness you sometimes feel at 2 in the morning, lying there convinced something is wrong with you. Ekirch's research suggests it might be your nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems did for hundreds of thousands of years, waiting for the second sleep. Perfectly calibrated to a night that no longer exists. Your brain, when left genuinely alone, does not go quiet. It does something researchers spent decades accidentally ignoring because it only shows up when you're not doing anything measurable. In the early 2000s, neuroscientist Marcus Raichle noticed that certain brain regions were more active during rest than during focused tasks, which was backwards from everything the field expected. He named it the default mode network, and what it turned out to be doing was extraordinary. Processing your sense of self, running simulations of future scenarios, consolidating memory, generating empathy, constructing narrative out of experience. It is, essentially, your brain filing its paperwork. Except the paperwork is who you are. Ancient humans sitting by a fire with nothing particular to do were not wasting time. They were running this system at full capacity, no interruptions, no competing inputs, no notification pulling focus back to a 2-inch rectangle of glass. The mind wandered, which is a dismissive phrase for something that turns out to be cognitively expensive and genuinely necessary. Creativity researchers have found that the default mode network is disproportionately active in people who score highly on measures of original thinking. The idle mind is not lazy. It is doing the work that focused attention cannot. Here's what the brain makes of our current arrangement, and I think it would file a formal complaint if it could. We have spent roughly the last 15 years filling every available gap, the commute, the queue, the 30 seconds waiting for the kettle, with algorithmically selected content calibrated to prevent exactly the kind of unfocused drifting the default mode network requires. Every quiet moment is now a content opportunity. The brain reaches for its most important background process and finds the slot already occupied by a video, possibly about ancient humans. The irony is not lost on me. What those afternoon hours by the fire actually were, neurologically, was restoration. Not passive, not empty. The kind of deep cognitive reset that the brain has been expecting on a structural level for 300,000 years, and that the modern world has decided is indistinguishable from wasted time. The brain disagrees. Quietly, persistently, every time you feel vaguely restless for no reason you can name. So go back to that first image. No alarm, no Monday. Eyes open at sunrise, the whole day structureless and yours. The version of you that finds this terrifying, that reaches immediately for a schedule, a task, a reason to be somewhere, that version is not broken. It's just very recently trained. The anxiety you feel around genuine, unstructured time is real, but it is not ancient. It is approximately as old as the industrial workweek, which is to say, it is a historical novelty dressed up as a personality trait. What ancient humans did all day was this. They fed themselves and their people, which took 3 to 5 hours and was also simultaneously a social and political act. They talked, at length, with great investment about each other, which was not idle chatter, but the active maintenance of the web of trust that kept everyone alive. They cared for the ones who couldn't care for themselves, not because a system required it, but because those people were known and therefore mattered. They slept in 2 pieces with a quiet hour of dark wakefulness in between, and then they sat and let their minds do the slow, unspectacular, absolutely essential work of being a self. That is the complete picture. It is not dramatic. It is, in the most literal sense, what we are built for. You are carrying 300,000 years of that architecture right now, today, in the same body that is also somehow expected to answer emails before 9 in the morning. The restlessness you feel on a slow Sunday afternoon, the guilt that creeps in when you're not producing anything measurable, the low hum of wrongness when you just sit. That's not a character flaw. That's a mismatch. Your nervous system is running ancient hardware in an environment it was never designed for, and it is doing a genuinely remarkable job of coping. The campfire crowd would not recognize your life, but they would recognize you, the way you lean toward the people you love, the way a good conversation makes time disappear, the way your mind, finally left alone, starts to wander somewhere that feels almost like home. Would you go back? Let me know in the comments.